The Committee on Education and Labor will come to order for the purposes of holding a first hearing on worker health issues raised in the aftermath of the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. I want to thank my colleagues for joining us this morning, and in advance thank the witnesses for being here for your testimony. This hearing will review the events immediately following the attacks, focusing on what lessons we have learned from the recovery from that event and how we can apply those lessons to protecting workers in future large-scale disasters and terrorist events. This will be the first in at least 2 hearings on how the country protects its response and recovery workers in the aftermath of large terrorist attacks or other disasters such as Katrina. Much has been debated about actions that were taken and actions that were not taken to protect workers' health following 9/11. We will continue that discussion today by hearing from those who are responsible for worker protection, health experts, workers themselves, and their representatives. We will explore the decision-making in some of those who are the responsibility for worker protection, the decisions made, and the reasoning behind those decisions. This was an extremely important subject, not just because of thousands of 9/11 responders continue to suffer from the aftermath of that tragic event, but we need to make sure that the first responders know that we will do everything we can to protect them during a national catastrophe like we faced as a result of terrorism 6 years ago and as a result of the hurricane 2 years ago. There are things we already know. There are a few things. There are some things and a few things. I'm sounding like Donald Rumsfeld, but anyway, there are some things we already know. As a result of the hazardous materials emitted in the air following the collapse of the World Trade Center, we are faced today with thousands of workers suffering from serious health problems resulting from exposures they suffered in the hours, days, weeks, and months that they worked at ground zero. We also know that 6 years after 9/11, this country has yet to provide a long-term serious health care needs for these workers. We will be hearing from one of these workers today, as well as an expert heading up the efforts to monitor and treat those workers. There is general agreement that communications from our government did not clearly communicate the hazards of the dust and the fumes to workers and residents. We know that many workers throughout the cleanup did not wear respirators that could have protected their health. As I stated earlier, the goal of this hearing is to look at the response of the federal government and other agencies responsible for worker health during the national emergency. As the first rule of rescue states, don't create more victims. Here are the questions I hope this hearing will help clear up. First, are current OSHA standards, both their chemical exposure limits and other standards like hazardous waste operations and emergency response standards, adequate to protect workers in situations where it is difficult to determine what workers are exposed to? It is clear that OSHA chose not to enforce its safety and health standards, particularly in respiratory protection standards, even in the months that followed 9/11. Where were the legal obstacles to enforcement or political issues or both? Would enforcement of OSHA regulations have been more effective than offering advice? Was focusing exclusively on technical assistance better than enforcing the law? If these standards are not adequate, is there anything that we in Congress can do to assist OSHA to better protect workers in the future? The City of New York was clearly responsible for managing the rescue and recovery, but to what extent were they also in charge of workplace safety? Can OSHA cede such authority to the city, as it was apparently done in this case? These are the issues that are not unique to New York. We face the same issues following Katrina, and we will explore those issues in future hearings. I also want to mention that one more item that will be a subject of future work of this committee. On Monday, the Department of Homeland Security released their near-final draft of its National Response Framework. We were very disappointed to see that worker protection is not given the importance that it deserves in this document, and we will be discussing this issue with the Homeland Security officials. Finally, I want to reassure the witnesses, particularly Ms. Clark, from OSHA, that in no way are we intending to devalue the valiant efforts that OSHA staff made during this crisis. We recognize that countless hours of your agency and your office dedicated to protecting workers, particularly following the destruction of OSHA's Manhattan office, area office number 6 of the World Trade Center, and we are most impressed that not a single life was lost in the immediate rescue and recovery efforts, which have certainly considered one of the most dangerous operations in this nation's history. This was a significant accomplishment due largely to the enormous and good work done by the dedicated employees of OSHA. Nevertheless, thousands of workers are sick today, and some have died. Similar safety and health problems occurred during Katrina, and it is incumbent upon us as the nation's lawmakers to draw out and to apply whatever lessons can be learned from this tragic event and its aftermath. And at this point, I'd like to recognize the senior Republican on the committee for Mr. McKeon for an opening statement.